All right, this is episode 3, The Haunted Field. My grandfather tells a strange story about a piece of land he had received from his father and later had given in turn to my uncle. One day, grandfather and I were crossing Uncle Roy's meadow, which had been grown up in weeds for as long as I could remember. As I walked through the tall grass, I stumbled on a rock. I examined it more closely and saw it was rough. Handmade tomb. It was a rough, handmade tombstone. Yes, grandfather answered my questioning look. This meadow's full of them. That's why we don't plow it. Although one person, my father, tried. I wanted to know more, so we sat on a fence half the afternoon while grandfather told me about the haunted field. Long ago, a slave trader had made his home on this property. He was a cruel man, and his neighbors gave him a wide berth. He had built a rough sort of barracks against the hillside where the slaves were kept chained to the walls, and the field below he buried the bodies of those who tried to escape or were disobedient as a warning to the others. Now this man enjoyed torturing his victims before killing them. However, and when it got so bad that the good people of Green Valley drove him out, no one would buy his land because of the evil name attached to it. After several years, my great-grandfather bought it against the advice of his neighbors and tried to remove all the taint from it. He burned the decaying slave house, and after about 30 years of living on the property, decided to use the meadow where the slaves had been buried. Grandfather was a little boy then, but he could remember his father saying that he had had a strange sense of foreboding all during the plowing, and that the horses had shied and given him a great deal of trouble all afternoon. The family all went to bed with the sun that night because there was so much to do the next morning. Grandfather was awakened by his father's terrified screams. His father had seen something, or maybe dreamed it, but it was real to him. He had heard chains clanking, moans and screams of tortured slaves, and had heard their quiet cries of despair. Let us have peace, at least in our graves, they begged, crawling on their knees, their chains clanking. Grandfather stopped there and lit his pipe, but after a time he went on. Well, my pa heard that carrying on for about a week. Then he decided he didn't really need that field. He let it grow back up, and he didn't hear any more strange noises. I left that meadow alone too, and so did your Uncle Roy. The screams and chain clanking, I said, all this was just your father's conscience bothering him in the form of a dream. And grandfather took another puff. Then he said quietly, but all us kids, we heard it too. All right, this is the story of the Misty Ghost. Many years ago, a young woman from Rollsburg was working in the city of Pittsburgh as a domestic. While there, she happened to meet a young man from Mannheim, a small community across the river from Rollsburg. They both were lonely, and before long they became good friends. They spent many a long evening talking of their families and their mutual friends. This relationship blossomed into love, at least on the girl's part. But in spite of his avowed sentiments, the young man refused to marry her. All too soon, she lost her position, and there was nothing left for her but to return home. As she rode back on the train, all she could think of was the disgrace she would bring to her family. She was not even sure that they would let her in. Each mile, bringing her closer home, seemed to make her burn deeper and deeper with shame. And with the excuse that she needed air, she went out to the platform between the cars. The night was beautiful with a full moon, and she noticed that the train was now on a high, winding trail following Cheat River. Just as the train passed over the caverns, she jumped. The young man, hearing of her death, hurried home. Filled with shame and remorse, he went to the caves on the anniversary of her death. He never came back. 2 days later, he was found on the bottom of the river, directly opposite the place where she had jumped. The old-timers say that on the night of the full moon, her spirit rises above the place where she jumped and hovers, waiting. Another white mist rises from the river and comes to meet it. They merge, then drift upward and fade away. All right, y'all, this is The Murdered Girl. Many years ago, a wealthy Connecticut man had a brother who lived on Point Mountain in Webster County, West Virginia. Now, the wealthy man's daughter was stricken by the dreaded disease called consumption, and he wrote his brother asking if she could come to the West Virginia farm to spend a month or two, for the doctor had said that a change of climate might cure her. The brother agreed to take her, and preparations for the visit were made. When the girl arrived, she paid $1,500 in advance for her board, room, and expenses. Later, her father sent her $2,000 more, which she gave to her uncle to keep for her. He decided to kill her and leave with her money. After the murder, he buried her under the hearthstone of the fireplace. He then took her money and went west. The house was haunted after this happened, and the door wouldn't stay shut. Occupants even tried bolting it, but to no avail. No one would live there any length of time. Two old Christian ladies who lived nearby told the man who owned the house that if he would put a bed in the room where the ghost was and get wood enough to burn all night, they would come and sleep in the bed, and when the ghost appeared, they would ask it what it wanted. The owner prepared the room as they suggested. That night they were lying there talking when the door opened and a young girl walked in. She put her hands behind her back and turned around, facing the old woman. They raised up on their elbows and asked her what she wanted. She said, "I was a rich man's daughter. My uncle killed me for my money and buried me under this earthstone. If you'll look, you'll find me." The next morning, they told a neighbor who lifted the earthstone and found her body. They called the authorities, who got out a warrant for the uncle's arrest, brought him back from the west, and hanged him on a tree near where he had killed the girl. All right, the hitchhiking ghost of Buttermilk Hill. In the early 1900s, an old-time peddler traveled from Fairmont to Fairview with his heavy pack of goods on his back. Everyone liked him and seemed happy to have him come, not only to display his wares, but also to report any news. The peddler was such a good, kind, and interesting man that people missed him when he stopped coming. It seemed as if he had disappeared. No one had heard or seen anything of him until finally his body was found stuck in a barrel which had been rolled into the valley below Buttermilk Hill. On dark, dreary nights, people would stay away from this hill. They tried to pass over it before dark because it was said that when one came to the top of the hill, the peddler's ghost would ride with him in his buckboard wagon or buggy, or behind him on his horse, until he arrived at the first house at the foot of the hill. Now, Jack Toothman, who worked in the mines at Granttown, also rode a brown mare between the mines and his house at Monumental. He usually tried to cross the hill before dark, but one night he stopped at a bar in Granttown. There, he started drinking and talking with some of his friends, and before he knew it, darkness had appeared. That night, Jack met the ghost of Buttermilk Hill. Sometime later, neighbors were awakened by a pounding at their door. When the husband opened the door, he saw Jack standing on the porch. He was as white as a sheet and shaking all over. So frightened, he could hardly talk. He swore that the ghost had jumped on his horse behind him, wrapped its cold arms around his wrist, and ridden with him until he got to the bottom of the hill. He said he had fought with it all the way down the hill, but could not get it off until he reached the bottom. From that time on, he always made sure to get past the hill before dark. All right, y'all, this one here is Midnight Whippoorwill. During Prohibition, many stills and moonshiners were to be found in West Virginia. One particular still was located in Smith Hollow. The owner was Charlie Smut, a very eccentric man. Charlie was a bachelor and had only one good friend, Jim Hayward. The two lived together in an old weather-beaten shack at the head of the Smith Hollow. Now, Jim was the only person who knew about Charlie's still. Charlie would only go to the still at midnight while Jim stood watch. They had an understanding that if Jim saw someone coming, he would whistle like a whippoorwill. On several occasions, they used this signal. Now, every night after Charlie had finished working with the still, he and Jim would sit down by the oak tree where Jim had stood watch and drink their daily portion of moonshine from tin cups that were camouflaged and hidden each night in a big hole in the oak tree. Now, Jim thought that Charlie always got the biggest portion and was bitter about this. But he never said anything because he thought Charlie wouldn't let him have any more liquor. Jim was becoming very old and feeble. On a snowy and windy Friday night, he died. Now, Charlie was all alone, but he never failed to make his midnight excursions to the still. 1 week after Jim had died, something very unusual happened during Charlie's trip. He heard a familiar sound, the whippoorwill. Immediately, he blew out the light in the lantern and hid. After a few minutes, he called, "Jim, Jim, is that you, Jim?" In return, Charlie heard the sound of the whippoorwill and the clatter of tin cups. Then all was silent. Every Friday night, the same thing occurred. On the first anniversary of Jim's death, Charlie made his usual trip to the still, but this time something else happened. After hearing the usual clatter of tin cups and the whippoorwill, Charlie glanced over to the oak tree. To his amazement, there stood Jim with a tin cup in his hand. "I finally got my share of moonshine," Jim said. And then he disappeared with the tin cup in his hand. Charlie was terrified and ran to his cabin. But after that time, he never again heard the whippoorwill or the clatter of tin cups. And he never again saw Jim. All right, y'all, we're going to do the next story, Galloping Horses. Now, during the Civil War, when West Virginia was often overrun by both Confederate and Union troops, a father and his two sons went off to fight in the army, leaving the wife and daughter at home alone. Before leaving, the three men took all of the money and buried it, never telling the rest of the family where, for fear the women might be forced by enemy soldiers to surrender it. The men, of course, believed that at least one of them would get back alive. It so happened that all three men died in the war, and none were left to return home. The two lonely women continued to live in their remote country home. Every night they would hear horses galloping around and around the house. But when they looked outside, nothing could be seen. Finally, the mother could stand it no longer. So she and the daughter would walk to a nearby farmhouse to sleep each night, returning early in the morning to tend to the farm. No matter how hard they tried, things seemed to go from bad to worse, and the two women were having a very difficult time making one evening when the two women were preparing to leave for the night. A peddler arrived and asked for a night's lodging. The women explained that they did not stay in the house at night because of strange noises, but he was welcome to sleep there if he wished. The peddler was quite tired and accepted their offer, telling them he had no fears. As soon as the women were gone, the peddler prepared himself for the night. He covered the fire in the fireplace, took off his boots, and lay down on a cot near the fire. Soon he was fast asleep. Now about midnight he was awakened by the sound of horses galloping down the road. He thought this unusual in such a remote area and at such a late hour, but he was even more surprised when they galloped up to the house and around it. He quickly went to the window, drew aside the curtain, and looked out into a clear moonlit night. He saw no sign of horses. He lay down again and soon dozed off, only to be awakened by the same sound, louder and closer than before. The peddler now began to be frightened, so he latched the door tightly and pushed heavy bureaus and other furniture against it. Again, he lay down, feeling more secure. Now suddenly the galloping stopped, and the door opened as easily as if it had not been barred. An old man with a long beard entered the room and sat near the fire, looking into the coals. Now the peddler noticed that the old man's throat was cut from ear to ear. He could not keep from asking, "Old man, "Do you know your throat is cut?" The old man answered without looking up, "Yes, I know my throat is cut." And then he continued to look into the fire. Now, about this time, a second man, younger than the first, walked through the door. He too sat looking into the fire, and he too had his throat cut. The peddler finally asked him the same question and received the same reply. Now soon a third man entered the room in the same condition, and he too sat staring into the fire. He gave the same answer to the peddler's question that the other two had given. Now after some time had passed, the peddler asked who they were. The old man explained that they were the men of the particular household who had been killed in battle by having their throats cut. He said they could not rest until the money they had hidden was back in the hands of the two women who needed it so desperately. They wanted to show him where they had hidden the money and asked him to give it to the wife and daughter. The peddler promised that he would put it in their hands, and the ghosts proceeded to lead the way to the fence corner where the money was buried. But upon leaving, the three men warned him that if he did not give the money to the women to whom it belonged, he would never sleep another night, but would always hear the galloping horses. They also told him to tell the wife and daughter that they need not leave the house again, since they would never be bothered by the sounds of galloping horses after that night. Then the three men rode away. The peddler kept his word and gave the money to the women, as he had promised, and was rewarded handsomely. From that time on, the women stayed in their home and never heard the sound of horses galloping around the house again. All right, this is a story of a Confederate soldier. One of the best known ghost tales of Tucker County was told by Lewis Kittle, who lived on the Indian Fork of Clover Run. His reputation among his neighbors and acquaintances was above reproach, and the following story is an account of the facts as he knew and understood them. Mr. Kittle was not a superstitious man and was not a believer in spiritualism. Now, in 1867, Lewis Kittle, with several others, was mining coal near the ground on which the Battle of Rich Mountain was fought. He and a cousin named Daniel Courtwright boarded with a Mr. Hart, whose house was adjacent to the battlefield and had been used as a hospital during the battle. In the course of the battle, a soldier had been shot in the room later occupied by Kittle and his cousin. Now, the first night in the room, they heard a weird and continuous noise. They supposed it was only the wind, but one day they were told by a fellow miner that the room was haunted. One Saturday night, soon after this, Courtwright was absent, and Kittle slept in the room alone. Along in the night, he was awakened by a strange coldness and a dim light that outlined the furniture in the misty air. The silence was broken only occasionally by a low sound that seemed to be the echo of a night breeze. Drawn by some unseen, irresistible power, Kittle arose from the bed and moved near the door. He said that he felt no fear and was struck with a sense of solemnity. Almost immediately, he saw 8 forms materialize, clad in Confederate uniforms. Silently, they approached the bed on which Kittle had been sleeping and removed the covers, throwing them over the footboard. 4 of them leaned over the bed and raised something up, as if lifting a weight. The object, which Kittle could not see, was laid down carefully upon apparently nothing. 2 of those who had lifted the object from the bed then took a place in front of the 4, and the other 2 stepped behind. In this order, they slowly marched toward the door, and as they filed out, Kittle saw lying between the pallbearers the body of a handsome young man. His coat and vest had been removed, but he was wearing butternut trousers. Now the figures made no sound until they had reached the hallway, where a noise resembling the knock of a crutch on a wooden floor was heard. This was followed by the closing of a door. Now Kittle collected the covers and returned to bed. He said that there was not any possibility of his being mistaken about what he saw. He was in perfect health, wide awake, and not frightened. Kittle spoke to several men staying in the house who said that other people who had occupied the room had had similar experiences. Now, on other occasions, when Mr. Courtright was present, the covers were removed from the bed several times in quick succession. Finally, both men got up, clutching their bedcloths tightly. The same cold, clammy light entered the room, and the weird wind was again heard as the 2 men were pushed out of the way and up against the wall. Then a calm and quiet settled over the room, and the gray air rolled like a fog in a slight breeze. The forms began to emerge slowly at first, and then suddenly stood in bold view. Again they approached the bed. In a few moments they solemnly took up their burden and enacted the same scene. These nocturnal visits became so frequent that Kittle and Courtright finally got used to it. When they first became aware of the cold light and weird echo, they would wrap their blankets tightly around them and say, "Here come them rebels again." All right, this one here is called Return from Death. When the war started in 1861, the only son in a family that lived near my great-grandparents went off to fight in the Confederate Army. The mother and 3 daughters were left to manage the farm, as the father had been killed in an accident the year before. They were at home one afternoon when a Union soldier galloped up to the house and knocked. Without opening the door, Miss Adams asked what he wanted. He demanded entrance into the house, saying that he would shoot through the windows if she didn't open up. There was nothing to do except to let him in. He asked the girls where the watches and jewelry were kept. They replied that everything had been taken earlier. This statement enraged the soldier, and he became nasty about the whole affair. He said he could wait as long as they could. He ordered the women to cook him a hearty supper. This he enjoyed very much, since it had been a long time since he had had a good meal. He kept the mother and daughters prisoners the rest of that day. Now the following day, they still insisted that their jewelry had been stolen at the outbreak of the war. Actually, the women had hidden the valuables so they couldn't be found. The soldier said he was tired of playing games. He would leave without hurting them if they gave the jewelry to him. Otherwise, he would have no other choice but to kill them. Stubbornly, the women refused. Without the watches and valuables, they would have nothing left. They couldn't work the farm by themselves, so the jewelry was the only security they had. Now, as the soldier prepared to carry out his threat, and was raising his gun, the figure of a man appeared out of nowhere, standing between the man and the women. Obviously, it was no ordinary person. Although the soldier could see through the form, he could make out the features plainly. The form told the soldier to leave at once if he valued his life. The women were speechless, for they recognized the figure as the dead husband and father. The soldier ran out the door and rode off as fast as he could. The form left as quietly and silently as it had come. Each of the women thought she had imagined the whole affair, but all soon realized that the father had come back to save them from death. A face in the window. During Civil War days, Charles Perry, a soldier in the Union Army, was often sent out to get supplies for the hospitals, butter, eggs, milk, chickens, and so on, and had many interesting experiences. Now, one morning, when he started out to gather supplies, he came to a farmhouse situated near a small creek. He rode up to the place, hitched his horse to the post, and knocked on the door. After a few minutes, he decided no one was home, but as he was going down the steps, he saw someone peering out the second-floor window. Charles went back up the porch and pushed open the door, gun in hand. There, by the chimney, stood a middle-aged lady, as white as a ghost. He asked her why she hadn't answered the door, and she replied that she was afraid he would kill her, since he was a Union soldier. Now, remembering the face at the window upstairs, he asked if anyone else was in the house. She swore to him that they were alone, but he asked if he could look around. Although she said she would rather he left, he started upstairs. Slowly, he climbed the steps, expecting a Confederate soldier to jump out of the doorway to shoot him at any moment. He ventured first into one room and then another. Finding no one, he had almost decided that he had imagined the face at the window. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he saw the figure of a young woman slide into an opening in the wall. The girl had long brown hair and a beautiful complexion. She wore a pink silk dress that fell in folds around her legs. As he turned toward her, the opening in the wall closed and upon inspection could not be found. Thinking it could be a passage to an inner room of the house, he closely examined the wood. There was not even a crack in the wall. Bewildered, he went to find the woman he had spoken with. But when he returned to the first floor of the house, she was nowhere in sight. Searching the house carefully, he could find no trace of her anywhere. Knowing she couldn't have gone far, he looked around the farm, but could find no clue to her disappearance. He rode to the nearest farmhouse, and a lady came out on the porch to greet him. He asked who lived in the farmhouse to the south, and she replied that the place had been deserted since an intoxicated Union soldier had come upon the house where the mother and daughter lived alone. The soldier had taken both their lives when they would not give him food and money. Shocked, he asked the housewife to describe the mother and daughter. Her descriptions fit the woman he had seen exactly. Charles rode back to the house in hopes of seeing the beautiful girl again. A strange feeling seemed to attract him to the place. Upon entering, he saw for the first time that the rooms were filled with dust and cobwebs, as if no one had been in the house for months. All he could see were his own footprints leading up the stairs.